It seems that the name on his grave has been altered to Muhammad Saeed instead of Muhammad Youssef Abdulazeez, but he has the same dates of birth and death. Muhammad Youssef Abdulazeez was born September 1990 in Kuwait to Palestinians living in Jordan. Early on, he was given a temporary Jordanian passport for travel, but Jordanian authorities after the 2015 attack emphasized that he did not have Jordanian citizenship. He and his family migrated here in 1999, and he became a naturalized U.S. citizen in 2003. At the Second Intifada, he and his father traveled to Israel with the ultimate goal of acquiring a couple of Palestinian IDs to advance the cause of Palestinian sovereignty. After moving back to the U.S., his family moved to Red Bank, Tennessee, where he graduated high school and began work at the University of Tennessee in Chattanooga, where he graduated in 2012. A year later, he went to work at the Nike plant in Ohio, but was laid off the same day for failing a drug test. His father and mother got divorced over complications with Palestinian citizenship, which kind of tied the trial up for a little bit. And around this time, he started going with his co-workers to the local gun range, and this was while he was working at Superior Essex in Franklin, Tennessee's office. Now, around this time, I should mention that Muhammad's father was in fact on a watch list and was questioned while abroad on a trip for donations that he'd made. But I do want to specify that at the time, a lot of Muslim men were on watch lists for donating to certain organizations which didn't have any clear terrorist ties. The most obvious one of these would be the Holy Land Foundation, which was donating to legitimate charitable causes in Palestine, but which after 9/11, U.S. authorities, because it was at odds with our ally Israel, placed on a watch list, and most of its members were questioned and put on the no-fly list. And so basically, after his father was questioned, they established that he had no terrorist ties. He was simply a conservative Islamic man. They took him off the watch list and they let him go. And this was a big thing that came up at the trial, or basically in the media firestorm afterwards, because Muhammad's father was supposedly on this watch list, but nobody ever did anything about it. In reality, it was just a clerical thing, a bureaucratic thing. In fact, for a while, his parents seemed very loving. They tried to send him to rehab, but their health insurance said that he couldn't go, and investigations afterwards said he had, quote, serious psychological problems. By the time of the shooting, he was abusing opioids, sleeping pills, alcohol, marijuana, and a myriad of other drugs. He had depression and bipolar disorder, and it was also established that he'd traveled quite a bit, but was never placed on the FBI watch list, in spite of the fact that his father was on there for a good period of time. From 2003 to late 2014, he began to travel to Jordan. In fact, he went 5 times, and there he would live for 2 to 7 months with his uncle, where he was a very secluded and solitary young man. And he also visited Kuwait, his country of birth, sometime in 2008. We don't really know what he did in Kuwait. And after returning from Jordan in 2014, he spoke to his friends and co-workers and said something that was a little bit off-putting. He said that the Gulf states should have sent more aid to Hamas. However, around this same time, ISIS was becoming very popular, and he made a lot of anti-ISIS statements. In fact, the Palestinians and Hamas have been very active in opposing ISIS. They don't necessarily like their brand of politicized Islam. In April 2015, he got a DUI, the only time he ever had an encounter with law enforcement, and his depression went through the roof. And that was when he started making some pretty concerning Google searches. Because of his very conservative upbringing and his mental disorders, he began to think of himself as nothing more than a sinner and a bad person. So he began searching, basically, can martyrdom totally absolve me of my sins? And he came to the conclusion, through downloading old tapes from the propagandists of Al-Qaeda, that even if you were a very flawed person, addicted to drugs and pornography, that you could become a martyr and be absolved of everything and welcomed almost overnight, instantaneously, into heaven. And so by July 2016, he had set out with a plan to attack the local recruiting stations in Chattanooga. It began as a drive-by, and then he headed down to a local Navy Reserve center where he crashed into the back parking lot and got into a shootout. 4 Marines died immediately, and a recruiter, a police officer, and a sailor were injured, and the sailor would go on to die 2 days later. Afterwards, he was very wrongly characterized as a ISIS recruit, even though he was speaking out against ISIS. He was a person who was addicted to a lot of things and had a lot of mental problems, and it's just incredibly sad. And this is the local Islamic cemetery not too far outside of Atlanta.